I am really excited to be here with all of you today. I understand that yesterday our conversations were incredible. I think they really set the stage. We have a phenomenal speaker, Daniel Lubetzky, that will come out in a minute. We heard about the global instability and how it has ramifications on all of our businesses, where the economy is likely to trend next, and what to consider when raising capital today. We also had the pleasure of meeting our new class of entrepreneurial winning women and our Entrepreneur Access Network. So congratulations to all of you again. Yeah. So I'm now thrilled to introduce Daniel Lubetzky, who I have no doubt will continue the conversation. I will tell you, I've spent some time with him. He is incredibly passionate, and his energy is contagious. Daniel is the 2013 Entrepreneur of the Year Award winner out of New York, and he's best known as the founder of Kind Snacks and the founder of Camino Partners, which is a business-building investment platform that helps entrepreneurs create enduring value with values as their compass. He is a true visionary, a business leader, investor, and social entrepreneur, passionate about building bridges between people, harnessing the power of purpose, and enhancing appreciation for shared humanity along the way. So please welcome to the stage, Daniel Lubetzky. Thank you. Well, welcome. I know this audience is very excited to hear from you. We have a lot of questions here, but one of the things I know about Daniel is you can ask one and you'll get a wealth of stories along the way.
So, in other words, he talks too much.
No. No. Really phenomenal stories. So we'll start with one that I know is near and dear to your heart about what you've been doing. But obviously, given the tragic events that are unfolding in Israel and Gaza, I wanted to start by asking you about your own history. You've been very involved with different peace initiatives since your early days as an entrepreneur. So can you tell us about some of the work that you're doing to bring Israelis and Palestinians together for the benefit of all people, and why it's so meaningful to you?
Yeah. First of all, I'm very grateful to be here with you guys. It's an incredible community. I enjoyed the interactions with a number of entrepreneurs that I found fascinating, doing really cool work, and it's just really energizing to be with a community of builders that are committed to just bring light to the world and do something cool to make everybody's lives better. So thank you for who you guys are. Thank you. Let it warm up. Go with a plus a few sentences later. I was born in Mexico City. My father was a Holocaust survivor. We can talk about that more if you want later. But ever since I was a kid, my primary purpose in this world has been to build bridges. And I'm very lucky that I found a way to use economics to do so. So right after law school, I started a company called Peaceworks that for 25 years was bringing people together through commerce. So we had Israelis, Palestinians, Egyptians, Turks, Jordanians, trading with one another in a symmetrical, equal basis to try to forge bonds, to discover each other's humanity, shatter cultural stereotypes, cement relationships, give them a vested interest in preserving those relationships. And at a macro level, it worked very well because for generations, our Israeli and Palestinian and Jordanian, Egyptian, and Turkish partners worked together for a variety of unrelated reasons. We closed it down like 5 years ago. We probably need to bring that back with Peaceworks 2.0, and I'm going to really do my best to try to do that. The other thing along the way that happened is that during a very tough spate of violence, not dissimilar to what we're going through now, I was very depressed to see that all of my partners on the ground were being overshadowed by extremism and violence and hatred, and started wondering where all the moderates had gone. And long story short, I went back to the region when I overcame my paralysis and my depression and spoke to a lot of Israelis and Palestinians on the ground. And I realized that the problem back then in the year 2000, 2001 was that the media was only showing us the voices of extremism, and the vast majority of Israelis and Palestinians on the ground, believe it or not, are far more moderate than the images that we have in the conflict. And so we created a movement called One Voice to amplify the voice of moderates, to try to seize back the agenda away from terrorists and forces of violent absolutism on both sides, and to try to seize back the agenda for conflict resolution. And so we built the One Voice movement, and this is a confused Mexican-Jewish New Yorker that together with a confused Palestinian citizen of Israel, Mohammed Darawshe, my friend, we built what is today the largest grassroots movement in the region. It's transformed on the Israeli side to a movement called Darkeinu, which has actively about 500,000 members and historically over 1 million. And on the Palestinian side is a movement called Zemam across the West Bank and Gaza, also with similar numbers, the largest grassroots movements. They've been very impacted by the war. We lost people. The Israeli chairman of Darkeinu, his son, Noni, was killed by terrorists when he was defending a village. But also Mohammed Darawshe's cousin, Awad, who's a Muslim, was tending to the victims of the music festival, and he also was killed. And we have Palestinian staff in Gaza. We're trying to evacuate and have had a lot of difficulty doing so because they're terrified of being in the middle of it, and Hamas has prevented that exit. We're hoping that today, during the humanitarian corridor, we'll convince our team to leave. She warned you that I start talking, I don't stop. But I'll just end with with two things. One is that we need to understand that the world we're living in today is, because of social media, extraordinarily distortive. And it's not just in this context, it's in all contexts, so we need to be smarter about how we consume social media. Back then it was bad enough that cable news would tell us, would amplify the voice of extremists because they're the scandalous voices that got the microphone. Today's far worse because social media algorithms literally target you and only tell you what you want to hear. So I happen to see both because I have this movement, but my Israeli family, my Jewish friends, pro-Israel supporters are following content that only shows the pain of the Israelis, the monstrosities of the Hamas terrorists, and the righteousness of that cause. And my Palestinian, Muslim, and Arab friends who support the Palestinian cause and subscribe to those channels only see the Israelis as subjugators. They literally do not see what Hamas did, and each side is only getting the extreme versions of the worst of the other. And then there's this, perhaps among here, a lot of people are like, what are you talking about? I'm not seeing anything, because you're not subscribing to all those channels. So it's a third world reality where why are these people making a big deal out of it? And it's extraordinarily dangerous to consume too much social media. It's diminishing our souls and our spirits, so just be careful about that. And it's also very, thank you, yeah. I told you to wait for the right moment, I won't know. And it's also very, very dangerous to not pierce those bubbles and try, as painful as it is, to understand how the other side thinks. It's not because you want to give up loyalty to your people. It's because by understanding how the other person sees it, you become more effective at solving problems. Now, this point I'm making is not just for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or for fighting anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hate and anti-Christian hate. It's for fighting not just all forms of hate, it's for being the most creative, entrepreneurial nation that we are. Because the last 5-10 years, the rigidity that social media has forced upon us, the rigidity that culture has forced upon us, endangers our ability to have critical conversations in the workplace. What made Kind the very successful company that it was is that we had a hearty debate. And I was the CEO, my president, John Leahy, and I had very different political viewpoints, but we encouraged and very different operational viewpoints. I was a crazy entrepreneur wanting to do everything, and he was the operational partner slowing me down. And that complementarity allowed us to build Kind into what it was. Had he not been able to receive my energy and channel it, would have not had that criteria. But had I not let him control me, I would have drowned us. And so it's very, very, very important that we celebrate differences, that we celebrate complementary styles. And I'm now going to continue talking ad nauseum till Julie says, shut up, Daniel. Let me ask a second question.
I told you his energy is contagious. Well, so let's just pivot a little bit to, you talked about your family, you talked about your father in particular. So talk a little bit more about how that influenced starting Kind and how that continues to influence you today.
So my dad was 9 years old when World War II started. He was 12 years old when he was sent to concentration camp, 15 and a half when he was liberated from the Dachau concentration camp by American soldiers. and who risked their lives to liberate an entire continent. And if there's any veterans that are serving a nation, thank you for your service. For me, it's really not lost on me. And what was interesting about my dad is that he did not forget what happened to him. He talked to us about it, and it did sadden him when he discussed it. But he was an incredible source of light. He managed to be a very positive human being, which is very hard when you've gone through the bitterness and the pain. Let's say Israelis and Palestinians that are right now going through so much pain, losing their families. How do you transcend that to be a light unto the world and to not be embittered by injustice to your people and pain and losses and deaths of your family? And my father managed to just be the kindest person in the world. And in his telling of how he lived life and how he survived, he told us about the acts of kindness from the other side, about how not every German was a monster, that there was a German soldier when people were not watching that threw a potato by his feet. And there were many other instances, some of them horrible stories. If you want, you can go to YouTube, and there's an interview with my father, Roman Lubetzky, and listen to the 2-hour interview with him. He's now passed away. But when we were conceiving what ended up being Kind, we were trying to come up with a name for the company, and we wanted a brand that could stand for something that was what ended up being kind to your body by being nutritionally dense ingredients, to your taste buds by being delicious, and to your world by trying to foster acts of kindness. And the same year that we conceived Kind is the year that my dad passed away. And it was very weird because it was one of the toughest years of my life, because he was my hero and my best friend and my inspiration. And at the same time, it was also a year of a lot of professional growth and a lot of meditation and self-reflection. And so Kind is named after him in honor of his way of trying to be kind to the world.
Mm-hmm. It's a great story. It's a great story. Well, and I think that probably also influenced culture. You and I talked quite a bit about culture, and you've got the 3 C's. You've got curiosity, compassion, and courage. And I'm sure a lot of that. So talk about how you drive those cultures in all of the businesses that you start.
This is a movement called Starts With Us that I co-founded with 250 other incredible people, from business leaders like Mark Cuban to musicians like will.i.am, from Lonnie Ali, the head of the Muhammad Ali Center, to Bernice King, the daughter of Martin Luther King, from the chef Jose Andres and you have Erskine Bowles, the former chief of staff to President Clinton, and Karl Rove, the former advisor to Bush, working together to try to bring to society problem-solving skills so we can work across lines of difference and actually solve problems rather than just dehumanize one another. And I'm trying to not give too many poses because I don't want you to applaud too much, because then I don't get to talk more. But what we distilled from our Kind experience and from many years of work with a lot of partners is that there's essentially a toolkit that we all need to regain that made America what it is today and what makes enterprises what they are today, which is a lot of critical thinking, critical listening, curiosity. So the bucket of curiosity is about wanting to understand and encourage hearty debate, because I really feel the last 5-10 years have made a lot of people scared to challenge one another, and there's a way to do it, to disagree better, right? To disagree respectfully, and it's really, really important that we create the environment to allow that. That requires you to have a lot of trust, to assume positive intent, to have very open communications. Communications, in my experience, is one of the, if we need to score the corporate sector, is one of the areas where we tend to fail the most. The gentleman that I was introducing talked about the difference between kind and nice. At the essence of our culture is understanding that difference. A lot of people will confuse kindness with weakness and softness because they confuse it with being nice, but they couldn't be more different. You can be nice and not have strength. You can just be passive and be nice and polite. But to be kind, you need the strength of action. You need the strength of honesty. So a nice culture, which is, I think, what pervades most corporations, doesn't want to offend people, doesn't want to say things that are uncomfortable, but consequently doesn't create enough value in helping elevate all of us with feedback. A kind culture has the courage to provide honest feedback. If you're nice and you see somebody that had their breakfast and they have a little piece of red bell pepper in between their teeth, and I normally use lettuce, but because it's at breakfast time, I'm changing up my repertoire. But if you're nice and you see that, you're like, "Ugh," and you just walk away. You don't want to embarrass them. But if you're kind, you're like, "Julie, I have something to confess." No, I'm joking, you're fine. But if you're kind, you let them know, look, you might want to get rid of that thing because you look like a schmuck. And you don't say the schmuck part, but you just think it. But if you're nice, you don't cause problems. But if you're kind, you solve problems. If you're nice, you don't bully. But if you're kind, you stand up to the bully. You stand up for humanity. You stand up against extremism. And earlier I was telling you about the movement that I built One Voice, and there was a very fundamental missing piece of it that I only thought about in this last month. And I've been doing this for 20 years, One Voice, and 30 years Peace in the Middle East. I always talk about how this conflict, the Middle East conflict, but it's frankly all over. The Ukrainian war, what's going on here in the United States, all the things where we have started as an initiative called Citizen Solutions, trying to demonstrate that there's a lot more consensus that meets the eye, that about 80% of the seemingly most intractable issues can be agreed upon by about 80% of the population. And we've demonstrated with the data. On the toughest issues like borders and education and gun safety and so on, we actually have practical solutions, but we get hijacked by extremism. And so conflicts are not left versus right, or Jews versus Muslims, or Israelis versus Palestinians, or Democrats versus Republicans. Almost all the conflicts that we're facing today are moderates versus extremists. The challenge is, extremists are a very small number, but they wake up in the morning and they're like, how can I advance my cause? Moderates are the overwhelming majority of the population, but they wake up in the morning and they're like, what can I have for breakfast? And consequently, extremists hijack our minds, our hearts, our brains. I guess our minds and our brains are the same, so you see how they already hijack mine. And the problem is that unless moderates take action, we are going to bequeath to our children a much worse world than the one we inherited. And so extremists that take action are destroyers. They want to divide, destroy, and diminish. Moderates that take action are builders. They want to build, unite, and bring light to the world. Entrepreneurs are builders. Like, I've had several talks that I've given in the last couple of weeks, and people from all walks of life, the overwhelming majority of Jews, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, atheists, everything, they are just they have the potential to be builders. And it's essential for all of us to be builders now. We cannot be passive actors, because we are entering a stage in life and in society, in the world, where if we're passive actors, the consequences will be very, very damaging. Every single one of us in this room today need to become builders. It's really, really essential.
That's great. Well, you're very good. And you are talking to an incredible group of builders out here. And
yes.
So, as an entrepreneur, you also have, so you've got your 3 C's of culture, but you also have your 3 C's of kind of the entrepreneurial phases. So you want to go through those, because I think
I feel bad. I didn't even, in the 3 C's of culture was curiosity, compassion, and courage. I will not go into them now because I really will, she'll take out the gun.
No, so you've got creative, critic, and crusader.
Yeah, so just a secret for all of you. Anytime you need to come up with like little things, the C's work really well, because there's just C's for everything. We have the 3 C's for the entrepreneurial process, 3 C's for positive culture, and I have many others. But the 3 C's for the entrepreneurial process are the creative person, the critic, and the crusader. They need to be very separated. If you don't separate them, and if you don't do all 3, you can get in trouble. So the creative process, whether you're starting a new company or coming up with an idea, a marketing idea, is the process where you're just going to ideate and think outside the box. Try to shatter conventional assumptions and wisdom, and all the false premises that make you think that you cannot think with and, right? Like you have to do this or that. And trying to say, well, does the product really need to be healthy or tasty or wholesome or convenient or socially impactful or economically sustainable? How can I do something that actually challenges that? So the creative process, you're writing down ideas, and during that process, nothing is wrong. You cannot say no to anything. You're bringing your team, and the stupider the idea, the more you celebrate and put it on the board. And it's really important to be almost religious about the process of welcoming the silliest of ideas. Because sometimes the best ideas require you to break through, and to break through you really need to just think outside the box. And so you really want to encourage crazy thinking. And during the creative process, you want to just be in creative mode and separate that from the next phase to allow that. Once you feel you've done all of that process and you think you come up with the right product idea or the right service or the right marketing campaign, then you take a break. It might be an hour or a day or a week, depending on the nature of the process. And then you come back and you are your own worst critic. And you write down all of the filters you can think of. Do I have the right to win? Do I have the skills that's necessary to win? Do I have the right resources? Do I have the staying power? Do I have the temperament? Does my brand fit with this? Is the input-output correlation right? Like low input, high output, or if it's significant input, at least get significant output. What is the competitive landscape? You do a ton of research. If you don't think you're competitors, you go back and do more research, because everything has competitors. In Shark Tank, when somebody says there's no competition, it's already almost like the sign of death. Like there is always competition. So you need to frame it properly and understand your competitor. And a true investor welcomes you understanding your competition and knowing how you're going to beat them, rather than thinking there's no competition. And so that process is like trial by intellectual fire. You have to really go through that process. And only if you really, really are convinced that this makes sense after really being your own toughest critic, then you enter the third point, which is the most exciting for entrepreneurs. You flip a switch and you go into execution mode. And during that process, you no longer can doubt yourself. You have to execute. You have to believe in yourself, because you are going to face a lot of ups and downs. You are going to face enormous challenges, and you have to give yourself the patience and the conviction to get there. One of the interesting things about Kind is that when we launched it, not only had my dad passed away, but Peaceworks was only like a $2 to $3 million business, and we had just lost $1 million because one of our suppliers had changed the ingredients, and we had lost a lot of business because they had added artificial ingredients, and we were selling to the natural trade, and we were about to go bankrupt. Like, I was paying myself a $24,000 salary and barely able to make ends meet and pay my 6 team members. And we went around the table and we said, should we launch this project that ended up becoming Kind? And part of me, after 10 years of being in the wilderness with Peaceworks and 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, a lot of mistakes, part of me wanted to just throw in the towel and just like go look for a job with a friend. But all of us voted, and we had a unanimous vote, let's give this one last shot. And it was one of the darkest moments. It was, my dad had just passed away. I was exhausted from this loss of business. I was barely able to make payroll. And then we launched Kind, and oh my God, like it just became all of the 10 years of errors from the past, we were absorbing them and learning from them, and then said, all right, we're not gonna make all of these prior mistakes. And when we launched Kind, it just was a juggernaut, and it grew triple digits for 10 years in a row, doubling basically every year more or less, cash flow positively and profitably for 10 years in a row. And to think that we were this close to giving up at that moment. And you never know when is that situation for you, where if you're patient with yourself and you need to draw lessons, you need to be convinced to not be giving up, but you need to be listening to the marketplace and adjusting to listen to that feedback, because you never know when that moment will be yours.
Right. So if you think back, that was a really difficult moment. and you decided to move forward. So as you were growing and scaling, what was the biggest challenge after that? And what did you learn from it? Would you have done anything differently? Because I know everyone in this audience, including myself, we can all say, we learn from our mistakes, we learn from what we would have done differently. What do you think the biggest one is for you?
It's very hard to think about what I would have done differently because it worked out pretty good.
Yeah, it did. It did.
Like, arguably, we should have actually brought in more money earlier, but I think it was pretty good that we created a culture. What happened is during my Peaceworks years, nobody wanted to invest in me, and that they were smart to. Like, we barely were growing, we barely were making ends meet, and I didn't have cash. And so consequently, those 10 years, I adopted a scarcity mentality. And the good thing about the scarcity mentality is that you stretch the dollars, but the bad thing is that you don't invest where you need to invest. So when Kind was this incredible product that 9 out of 10, what we found out later, 9 out of 10 people that would try it would buy it multiple times again in the next month or 2 months and would recommend it to others. But we didn't think about sampling that way. For us, it was a cost center because I was like controlling all costs. So our budget in 2008 for samples was $800. And that included samples to the trade. That included samples to the buyers. And I didn't understand the better culture, which is a resourceful culture. So there's scarcity culture, resourceful culture, and wasteful culture. Wasteful culture is you're not minding the dollars, you're not respecting money, it is extraordinarily dangerous, you're just wasteful, and you'll really get in trouble. Scarcity, you probably won't die, but you won't grow the way you need to grow. A resourceful mindset is spend the least amount of that you need to, but spend on everything you need to spend. Invest where you need to invest. So in 2009, we got our first infusion of private equity, and we started our sampling budget that year was $800,000. And then, 2-3 years later, our sampling budget was $20 million. And that made all the difference because everybody that would get a free Kind bar would become an ambassador and help us grow. So I think one of the biggest things that I would have theoretically adjusted was how much money I raised and how aggressively I invested, but it worked okay. So I really do believe that as long as you're listening to yourself and being self-reflective, which is a very important thing that I try to not lose, as long as you're criticizing yourself in a constructive way, when you're having a bad day, be forgiving of yourself, but when you're doing okay, be tougher on yourself and try to figure out how you can grow. Failures are really just milestones for you to learn from and become stronger. There is no question that the 10 years at Peaceworks were what incubated the success at Kind. So when people ask me what would have changed during those Peaceworks years, because believe me, I was doing everything wrong. Like I was just totally unfocused, trying to do ventures all over the world because I love the concept and the mission, but I wasn't letting any of them grow. I was trying to put our products in a convenience store and in a department store. Like I had no sense of strategy and focus. And I can give you 20 more mistakes. But thanks to those mistakes, when we then launched Kind, we got it right.
Oh, that's great. And you talked a little bit about private equity, and I know that's something that this audience really thinks about, raising capital. How do they raise capital? Who do they choose to partner with in raising capital? How did you go through your private equity decision?
If anybody's wondering if this is a real plant, I believe it is. It looks so perfect, but...
You can probably take it with you if you'd like.
I will.
Okay.
How
did you decide who to partner with? How did you decide how much money to raise? And then obviously when things weren't aligned, you decided to buy out your private equity. Could you just walk through that journey a little bit for
it is one of the areas where you need to spend more time thinking on that. We tend to, as entrepreneurs, we don't tend to be as strategic about these questions. Most investors are very transactional, and they can outperform us during that negotiation because what they do is negotiate these deals. Whereas most entrepreneurs, we're long-term oriented, relationship oriented, and this is the one deal we're going to do. So you really need to overinvest, surround yourself with really, really good counsel. I was very blessed that I had my roommate from law school, AJ Witt, is by my side. But ask questions, be ultra curious, try to really, Ernst & Young, and other people that really have seen this before, ask for their advice. You're gonna give me my $20 later?
Yes.
Surround yourself with people that have seen this before, because for us entrepreneurs, the stakes are very high and we think we know it all and we really don't. Try to find a private equity partner that is gonna be strategic and add value to you, that is not gonna just be what they call dumb money. The number of entrepreneurs that focus on valuation at the middle stage rather than on really, really who's gonna help me grow the best. If you're selling your company and you're out of there, you should consider maximizing value. But if you're raising money to grow, then a strategic investor that really knows what they're doing and that's gonna be able to help you is more valuable than someone that'll give you 10% higher valuation, but it's gonna add more value or potentially detract value. So really be thoughtful about who you're looking for and check with prior deals they've done with prior entrepreneurs whether the people added value. It tends to be that there's very limited value that most investors can add because that's just not in their wheelhouse. That's, by the way, why we created Camino Partners, because we're entrepreneurs first and operational first. And Ellie, who's there, now you need to give me $20 too for... The other thing to consider is the timing, right? That's very, very hard to know. But as a rule of thumb, the best time to raise money is when you've already perfected the mouse trap. Because if you're raising money very early and you haven't figured out what your product or service is, your valuation is going to be very severely punished. You're going to give up a lot of your company. So if you can bootstrap as much as you can till you've really figured out your product or service, and now it's just about filling the white space, about growth, and you can invest those dollars in growth, that's best. And even better is if you can figure out in your own business model how to grow sustainably without having to get a lot of investors, which is very hard, but it's not impossible. And, you know, work your supply chain. As a rule of thumb, all of us entrepreneurs spend too much time on marketing and sales and not enough on supply chain. Because marketing is glitzy and all the fun people and all the ideas, and supply chain sometimes can be very boring. But supply chain is essential. Like the amount of companies that are in trouble because their supply chain is broken and they're only getting 20% margins, and every time they sell a product, they're actually going to lose more money. That's not a recipe for success. So you need to try to, if you can work out with your suppliers a long-term agreement where you're going to be loyal to them, and in exchange, they'll give you good payment terms, all of a sudden, you might be able to scale up sustainably with their partnership. So try to avoid getting investors, particularly if they're not strategic, if you're able to raise other ways for you to grow. And then, do you want me to continue on the last thing? Or?
Sure. Go ahead.
So Julie was alluding to a very interesting episode in Kind's history where, oh yeah, that's aligned with the vision for your potential exit. Like when I started Kind, I was never thinking about selling it. I was just thinking about building. And that's what allowed Kind to become the brand that it was. And most private equity investors have a window during which they need to raise the money, deploy it, and get them a return and give it to their investors. I invest in some of those funds, and I want to have that liquidity. But the limit with those models is that there's a lot of friction between these funds and the entrepreneur, because the entrepreneur, like in my case, when my investors came on board, they inserted into our contract, because I was a fool, I think that they could run a process at 4.5 years after the company, or 5 years, sell the company. And 4 years later, and back then I thought, yeah, never close your options as an entrepreneur. Because back then I thought that at 5 years I'll be done. But guess what? 4.5 years later, we're just getting started. It's like, it's a juggernaut. Like, why would I want to sell? But they want to sell because they need to show a success and they want to raise more money. And so the tensions were very significant. And it was a very difficult process because I didn't have pre-negotiated terms for how to buy them out. So they ended up getting like a 17x return, I seem to think, in 4.5 years. It was like incredible return for them. They put in $16 million, 5 of which we put in the company, 10 of which I took, or 5.5 and 10.5, something like that. No, and there was a 1 for all of my team, so that was where it was 16. They put in 16, they got, I think, $227 million plus dividends that we had paid. So they had a crazy return, and it was very painful, and I sweated to be able to pay them back, and I had to get a lot of debt. Now that said, it was very strategic. I had done a lot of work about getting a sense of what the next move in the chessboard would be, and I had a lot of confidence that I was then going to be able to reverse dilute myself and maybe bring a more strategic partner for the next phase. So I talked a lot, so stop.
No. It's good, but I think it's helpful just to hear your journey, because there's lots of different journeys and what worked for you and what didn't.
But the summary is try to get an investor that's a long-term investor that doesn't have this artificial need to have an exit. But if you work with a fund, then negotiate fair terms, because they do need to have an exit, negotiate terms for you to have the option to buy them out at the right time.
Yeah, well, and it sounds as if you really looked at them as part of your team. And that's one of the things that when we talked before is people are really important. Ideas, diversity of perspectives. So talk about how you cultivated teams around you and how that's been so important, because as an entrepreneur, you've got a lot of big ideas, but you also need others to help you execute. So just talk a little bit about that.
So let me contrast from when I started to then where I am today, and how I surround myself with people that are far smarter than me and that know better. But when I started Peaceworks before Kind was incubated by Peaceworks. But I was trying to sell this line of, the brand was genius. It was called Moshe Pupik and Ali Mishmumkin's World Famous Gourmet Foods. It was very easy to remember. That's why later we just all right, let's just call it Kind. That's it. But when I was running this company, I was running out of the basement of my building, because it's another story for another time, but I had a lot of inventory. I put my $10,000 in savings and bought all this inventory, and it didn't fit in my studio apartment, so I had to scramble because I didn't even know that it was so much stuff. And last minute, I convinced my landlord to rent me a windowless basement. To get to my windowless basement, you had to go through the laundry room and then go through the trash compactor. And the trash compactor was across from what became my office for the first 5 years of my existence. And so a few times a day, the trash compactor would compact. And these pungent aromas of trash would ooze into my office. And so you can imagine it was very, very hard to attract people to come work in that environment. And it was more about what victim can I, people would send me resumes and I interviewed them. It was come in, you breathe, come on board. And some of these team members were amazing, but I didn't know how to manage. I didn't know what I was doing. I was micromanaging. I didn't know how to create complementary strengths. When things finally started working, and it took me many years to learn this, is when I started finding out that while I knew a lot about all of the things, because I started as a one-person operation. I was waking up in the morning to knock on the doors of stores, walking door by door to every store, and then getting in my car, in my beat-up car, and delivering the product from the trunk, and then bringing the inventory in the thing, and writing the invoices, and going to collect. So I knew a little bit about everything. But when I started actually really succeeding is when I found people that were better than me at what they were doing, and then I would give them the respect they deserved, because they were better and I needed to recognize that and not be intimidated by it. And it's very easy to say, but sometimes all of us entrepreneurs might be intimidated by greatness, and that is the wrong attitude. But we're all human, we all have egos. We just need to remember to keep those in check and try to empower people that are better than you. Ellie, without any doubt, is better at accountability, at operational excellence, at being, at just getting stuff done. I'm very creative, so I need to surround myself with people that will help me manage that properly. And when Kind really started taking off is, first of all, when we were no longer next to a trash compactor, so we could maybe attract better talent, but also when we started really, really investing in creating that environment where you're creating a culture where it's we, not me, where it's, at Kind we have something called Kind and Hungry values. And the kind values that are about the how we do things, right? It's we, not me. It's trusting one another. It's how you do things matters. It's not just where you're going, but treating each other with kindness, with respect, with a culture of openness, with an assumption of positive intent, just being together in it. That kind was what we were working for, not ourselves. And then the hungry aspect is accountability, hungry hunting, sniffing out the opportunities and trying to get those opportunities. It's about being entrepreneurial and having an ownership culture, an ownership spirit. Every single person at Kind had stock options, every single one. If you were cleaning up a bathroom or the president of the company, everybody was part of the family, everybody was on this together, and we held hands together, and we created a culture where if somebody knows something was wrong, you encourage them to raise their hand and you celebrated them. And because you can tell my personality, if I was debating something with somebody else, I would make sure that at the end of the meeting, I would say, you were the most valuable person. Whether we ended up in their side or on my side, it didn't matter. The fact that they stood up to this confused Mexican Jewish passionate guy, like, you need to, every CEO here will make the mistake of creating a culture where people are afraid to tell you what you need to hear. The more you succeed, the more you need to really double down in making the effort to create that culture of people to challenge you.
That's great. Well, and we've got a couple minutes left, but we talked a lot about Kind, but Camino Partners is something that you also started. So you're now on the opposite side. You're investing, you're trying to make sure that entrepreneurs have the resources they need. How did Kind inform your decision to start Camino? And what lessons have you learned from that?
First of all, I shared some of those earlier, but it's like that thing was that men are from Venus, women from Mars, or the opposite. Like, it's investors and entrepreneurs are very different animals. And it's hard for me to be an investor because I like people. That sounded so bad for the investors. I like investors. Some of them do like people too, but they like money more. Sorry, guys, any investors, I don't mean to be too tough on you. But I'm an investor, but I'm very relationship oriented. Camino is really trying to, what matters the most for us is people that have a lot of integrity, that how we're gonna execute is important, because you are gonna have those tough times. So we'd rather be in the trenches with people that we like, that we care about, so that we can together get through those tough moments. And life is too short to invest and partner with jerks. And so I think that's important. And what makes Camino, I think, different is that we are very entrepreneurial in mindset, very operational minded. We have an 18-person team where the vast majority of them are people that are the best person in communications, the best person in technology, the best person in legal, the best person in marketing, the best operational person. And they're here to try to help our partners execute with excellence. And that said, as an investor, I need to get a return on our money, and I make a lot of mistakes where I have blind faith or where I don't protect myself, and it's humbling to realize that there is a reason why investors must sometimes be disciplined. And so for me, the next stage of growth is trying to learn how to make the best of both, right? It's very, very hard to retain that entrepreneurial love, to build things and to support entrepreneurs while having enough discipline that I don't get in trouble and lose all of my money, or that I make money.
That's great. That's great. So my last question, first of all, I think you have to add an extra C to your repertoire, which is comedian. You've had everybody laughing here. But just final word of advice in the last couple of seconds for everyone out here that is being an entrepreneur and how to lead their companies to thrive.
I think, probably going back to what I said, find the right balance between being very self-reflective and being forgiving of yourself. And what that means is, first of all, when I was in college, I would walk, 15, 20 minutes to my classes or wherever I was, and I didn't have a device, so I had to talk to myself, I had to think, I had to just imagine, I had to dream, I had to have conversations with myself. All of us now, at least me, like I have 1 minute in the elevator, checking my tweets and my schmitz and my WhatsApp and my schmatzaps. And it is there's so much data coming our way. It's like a water hose, and there's not enough time for us to absorb it. So find time for self-reflection. Find time to talk to yourself. Leave your device at home and go for a walk. It's very awkward. It's very difficult. Try it out. If you haven't tried it out, it's actually hard because we've now used to entertain ourselves with all of this content. But it's so important because how are you going to know where you want to land in life if you don't talk to yourself about what gives you meaning, what gives you purpose, what's important to you, and what you did wrong that day? How could you improve? Where did you not live up to your expectations as a human being to be kind to others or to be like whatever the issue is? So find the time to be self-reflective and make sure that you separate that from your personal self-worth. If you're having a tough time, just celebrate yourself and your courage and your passion and the fact that you are one in a million trying, or maybe in 10,000, but you're a very rare person that is the person that has the vision to, oh, how can I solve a problem? And then the grit to try to execute it. That's what an entrepreneur is, right? Like the idea and the power to execute it. Because if you have a lot of creativity and you have the idea, but you don't execute, you might be an inventor, but it might be on the shelf forever. If you have the execution power, but not the idea, you might be a great manager. But when you have both, you are the entrepreneur, and you need to just be forgiving of yourself and cut yourself some slack.
Great. Well, Daniel, it has been my absolute pleasure. Join me in thanking you.
Thank you.
And so we are going to go this way, but thanks, everybody. Standing ovation.
Outstanding.